So we are entering into the point in time in the budget cycle where we're going to see a bill introduced. So the general appropriations bill, what is that? Yeah. What does it do?
Essentially, the House Democrats will be introducing, I believe it's House Bill 1330. That is the general appropriations bill. It essentially encapsulates the governor's spending proposal. It'll be the bill that says how much money is going to particular agencies within the governor's administration. All the funding requests that he has will be in that bill. So it is the starting point. It's essentially his $51.7 billion spending proposal that, again, is much more than we expect revenues to be. But that will be the starting point. They will introduce that bill, and then that begins the process of negotiations between Senate Republicans, Senate Democrats, House Republicans, House Democrats, and the governor's administration. But that is essentially the starting point. So
very likely the numbers are going to change. So what you see in the bill right now may not be what you see in the final product, correct?
This is the beginning of the process. So this is basically what the governor said in his budget address back in February. This is how much money I want to spend, how many millions I want to put here and there, billions in some cases, for various department agencies, administration, this and that. And then this sets the stage for what the Democrats think their baseline is going to be, essentially. And then we have to figure out how to bring both sides together to kind of meet somewhere in the middle, hopefully, where we can meet those fundamental needs but not exceed the expenditures beyond our revenues.
Sure. So, and another kind of point that we talk about with the budget and is going to be introduced as well are those non-preferred bills, right? So Pitt, Temple, Lincoln. Can you explain that process and why it's a little bit different from the general appropriation bill?
Well, I'm curious to see what they actually introduced this time, because in the governor's spending proposal, he only allocated flatline funding and then performance-based budgeting for the state-related universities, with the exception of Lincoln. So Pitt, Temple, and Penn State, according to the governor's proposal, are being allocated $60 million, but that will be split based on performance-based funding after the recommendations are issued by the Basic Education Commission that kind of took a different look at what and how we fund higher education. So I don't know specifically what those amounts are going to be in the state-related line items, but they're important because those require a two-thirds vote to be approved. So whatever is in those line items, whatever those increases are for Pitt, Penn State, and Temple, it will have to have a two-thirds vote from the House floor.
Gotcha. So those are kind of separate bills in and of themselves.
Yes.
And there are a series of other bills which are kind of separate from the general fund bill as well, such as something we talk a lot about, right? The fiscal code. And,
yes.
And that. So what is the fiscal code? What does it do? And where does that come into play?
Well, essentially, your general appropriations bill that we just talked about is how much is allocated. And then your fiscal code and some of your other code bills basically say this is how it's going to be spent. So they're more your nuts and bolts of the budgetary process, the nitty-gritty, if you will, about where the dollars go within those departments into specific entities and things like that.
And we're not even looking at a fiscal code right now, correct? We're just looking at the spending. There's a long ways to go before this process is anywhere near complete.
There is, yeah. We went through the budget hearings in February and March to kind of assess, where are we going to spend money, where are we going to hold the line on some spending, how can we try to make a budget that's really not even close to being balanced right now work. That begins the process. Well, it begins with the governor's budget address. Then we go through the budget hearings to kind of do our assessment of the proposal. And then the next step is for the appropriations bill to be introduced, which is the general fund bill that we were talking about. And then we continue to work through that process to kind of drill down deeper, assess where funds are going to go, how they're going to be spent. So over the course of the next 2.5 months, you'll see those bills introduced, rolled out, some of the general housekeeping bills that are necessary for some of the entities that aren't included in the general fund. And then we'll work to try and massage this into something that's reasonable, that's acceptable, that meets the needs, but is ultimately fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars.
So bottom line, there is a bill introduced. It is the governor's proposal, hardly a product that is agreed to, very likely to change. And all of these other pieces that are required to make the budget work together are not even are not even introduced yet. So we still have a long ways to go to get there. And for folks who are concerned about the funding levels within the governor's budget, there's really nothing to truly be concerned about right now, right? Because this is just a negotiating standpoint.
Right. And the bottom line is it has to change because we simply do not have the revenues to meet his spending request. And he's banking on new taxes that don't even exist right now. The legalization of recreational marijuana, the taxing and regulation of skill games, increase in the minimum wage. Those types of things are speculative as to how much revenue they might generate. In fact, the IFO says they're not going to generate even close to what the governor is proposing, to the tune of $800 million less than what the governor is saying they're going to generate. So there's a lot of big gaps that have to be addressed. But you're right. This is the beginning of the process. It gives us a starting point. We know where the House Democrats are. They're going to toe the line for the governor's spending proposal, and then we're going to have to reel that back in and make it more reasonable, more realistic, in line with what we expect actual revenues to be, without completely draining our rainy day fund and our surplus.
Yeah, because when you look at even just a couple of those things you mentioned, like the minimum wage, I think many people would take an issue that is going to generate revenue for the Commonwealth.
Right.
When you look at the impact and jobs lost versus folks who are working. So, I think there's a lot to go from here, but we just wanted to put the marker down that the general appropriations bill, which was introduced, just a starting point. So,
absolutely.
And that's been the Struzzi Scoop.